Choip, choip, choip. Choip, choip, choip.
The forces of evil are laser focused. See here, they've taught themselves to sleep with their eyes open. Dedication. Welcome to nondescript fairy tale land, where good and evil are constantly at odds, but good's about to be severely outclassed. This is the third Dungeons game. The ultimate evil, a hand that floats about, is bored. Their evil reign has no more challengers, and so they decided to take their show on the waves, to conquer a whole new continent, whose do-gooders look awfully similar to the previous continents. Convergent evolution of goodness, perhaps. Radiant light and blue accents are universal signs of virtue. But this time around, the ultimate evil has delegated the task to a sort of evil protege. Thalya, the dark elf, foster daughter of Thanos, the main good guy, and with your help she declares war on the entire goodly place. And their presence adds something, otherwise you would have just heard the narrator. Now there's a consistent back and forth. And the story, perhaps obviously, is a comedic thing. And in my opinion, it succeeds. Usually this kind of fourth wall breaking referential humor can fall short of the mark, or at least outstay its welcome. Yet I felt this attempt had a better quality, felt less tiresome. The narrator's sarcasm combined with Thalya's goofy rage. The narrator's voice acting is lovely and kind of expected.
They had accepted the quest to kill the ogre.
Fancy yet funny. And Thalya's wasn't some calculating sorceress, but rather this.
What? Alert! Come, creatures of evil, prepare to defend against intruders! Beat them, break their legs, pick their noses!
Somehow comes across delightfully dorky, and it works really well. But the humor does falter at times. For instance, some of the gags arguably were overused, such as good Thalya and bad Thalya's arguments, or bad Thalya's list of things she's gonna do to the enemy, or the narrator's knack for coming up with different names for the ultimate evil. And in spite of this, it's lovely. And even by the end, it didn't really become annoying. But fair warning though, as mentioned, it is reference heavy. And I know some people just can't stand this kind of humor. They reference Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, Star Wars, Warcraft 2. Some references I don't even get. But they're kind enough to emphasize it, so that I know there's a joke I'm not getting. We've reached the part of the review that at least some of you were expecting. The part where I compare it to the daddy, Dungeon Keeper. Maybe I should even compare it to its spiritual brother, War for the Overworld. Both of those games play more like management games, but Dungeons 3 chose to not make that the focus. Maybe that's harsh, maybe that element is just diluted and it shares first place with real-time strategy. In the underworld, you do pretty much what you would expect. You dig out earth and build your base, place traps to defend it, care for your creatures, picking them up and dropping them as necessary. Sometimes have that stack spill over, but in the overworld you have direct RTS control over them. So why would I think that RTS is at the fore and management on the back burner? Well, firstly, look at the creatures. Look at them in the dungeon. Some of them are taller than the walls. They're not contained by the dungeon. It's easier to see them this way and pick them up. And even fulfilling needs feels less involved somehow. When hungry, they go to your hatchery and eat turkey, because I guess it's hard to sleep down there. Although it's not like hearing gobbling all night will help. And when it's payday, they go to your treasury and help themselves. Your employees may be evil, but you trust them. And also they have other needs that need to be fulfilled in order to allow them to level up past a certain threshold. Beer for the orcs, mana for the demons, a place of worship for the undead. Okay, sure, technically that can be more needs in total, but they don't feel as fulfilling in the pursuit of building the ultimate dungeon. You do manage your dungeon a bit. For instance, for a room to reach 100% efficiency without research requires the placement of doors, because this workshop could do with less ventilation. Placing those doors can give you a nice little organizational jolt, in the same way that cavern symmetry can. But look at all this wall art and how cluttered your dungeon is. Also consider the fact that usually in a level there will be a gem scene that provides infinite gold, so you won't build that casino room or anything. And all of that makes it feel more like the dungeon is just a means to an end, and that end is producing a horde strong enough to beat the surface dwellers. Your rooms are like buildings in an RTS, except they're built into the caverns that your little snots, yes that's what they're actually called, carve out of the dirt on your behalf. And the units are more expensive than the average room as well. And that's just in terms of the initial hiring fee. Then in terms of salary as well. At least when they're high level. But that isn't necessarily bad, mind you. And also you can purchase new research, with gold but also evilness. A resource that's generated by islands of good that you conquer above ground, and can be taken back by the forces of good, to prevent you just staying underground until you're ready. You need to go above in order to progress and become stronger. But once you've taken over enough islands of good, you mostly stay underground mustering your forces, occasionally going up top to repel an attack on one of them. As joked about in the dialogue, heroes come into your dungeon in waves, and rarely pose much of a threat, at least if you develop at a reasonable pace and hire enough creatures, or place enough traps. You can actually place enough traps to stop most hero waves in their tracks. And once you've reached that point, you can pretty much attack at your leisure. Be a real subterranean Shaban. Especially if they're magic traps. Until now, I didn't realize just how similar the trap systems in Dungeon Keeper-like games were to the tower defense genre. I just noticed how much some of these traps look like traps on Orcs Must Die. This game also has the neat aesthetic and gameplay touch of dividing the creatures into 3 factions. As mentioned, they're the Orcish Horde, the Demons, and the Undead. And they not only have different needs, but they have different tasks. The Orcs produce traps from toolboxes, as well as the beer they drink. The Demons produce mana, and the Succubi fulfill a role always required in this genre. They torture things, and the Undead don't need to eat, and some of them don't need pay. And they can't die permanently as long as their graves are intact. And it's their job to combine mana and toolboxes into magic toolboxes to produce the mentioned magic traps. So the game is a surprisingly interconnected production supply chain. Creatures also gain combat experience and level up. It's really pleasing to see the experience get doled out. Although I don't think it's being divided between them, I think it's the standard rate. If you took part in the fight, you get that much. And unlike Dungeon Keeper, the training room is quite late game and late level. And rather annoyingly, only Horde creatures use it automatically. Other creatures can use it, but they have to be dropped there manually. For them it costs money, and it's rather fiddly. Because if they leave to say go eat, they don't come back. The gameplay is fun, but there is an issue. The campaign usually will have you doing the same thing over and over again, which is building up your base until you reach the technology level that the stage allows you, followed by an overworld slaughter, with a lot of levels giving you access to a new room or minion. Sure, sometimes there are different objectives, and new minions, rooms, traps, spells are exciting, and on some levels you don't have to develop fully to complete it, but after a while it does give nagging feelings of repetition. I mean, the combat is quite straightforward, but nonetheless I completed the game quite happily. That straightforward combat is fun. Seeing that flood of experience is fun. Unearthing some beasties underground is fun. If you've got the means to swat them. But the game isn't that difficult. If you've got the right spell and enough mana, you can do a lot of damage to a hero party. Apart from the campaign, if you're interested, it has skirmish maps with different conditions, but I didn't really partake. The game music emphasizes the feeling they were going for. Good versus evil, mean versus nice, spooky versus fairy tale. And the music sounds like cartoony caricatures of those concepts. Sure, it doesn't have many tracks and it's not groundbreakingly brilliant music, but it fits. And lastly, visually, the game is really lovely. Dark yet colorful. Dungeons with a lot of detail, cartoony, creepy. Perhaps more spooky, nothing actually scary. Unless, of course, you have arachnophobia. And above ground, we see some stereotypically goody-goody style, where scale is even less of a priority. Stylistically, I think it's great, if a bit well trod. And lastly, to cap everything off, some of the units will have amusing reference names. Nice one. A reference to the international pop star, Morak. Just classic. The campaign took me 41 hours to complete, but in all fairness, I meander and overdevelop a lot, so you might be quicker. And the game is cheap on Steam, 370 Rand full price, 88 Rand 40 on sale. That's 2 Rand 16 per hour of gameplay, which is pretty good. It does have a rather big download size, however, as it takes up 6.31 gigabytes on the hard drive, which is quite an ask. And I didn't even try it on the Warhorse. I'm pretty sure its dungeon art would shatter. And stereotypically, I suppose it's not that kid-friendly. I mean, some kids can handle it, but there were 2 weird situations where the B and S words were just used out of nowhere, in a fairly crass manner. Plus it has gags about fantasy prejudice, as well as a gag about dyslexia. Also the game has some violence, some blood. It splatters on the floor, but you see it from fairly far away usually. I maintain some kids can handle it. This game has great visuals, really colorful and cartoony. Dark dungeon dwellers and fairy tale fellers. It's quite detailed too. It has good music. Mischievous evil versus tranquil goody-goody. It's not groundbreaking and there isn't that much variety, but it fits. It has fun gameplay, it's pleasant to build up your forces, fun to carve out your base, has simple satisfying combat, with some funny ragdoll physics. It gives you a jolt to see your evil spread across the land and your creatures gain experience. And the game, in my opinion, is funny. It is very reference heavy, and it does overuse some gags. But ultimately, I believe it's one of the better examples of this kind of humor. It has good voice acting, Thalya and the narrator have a good back and forth, plus your creatures have gag reference names. And sometimes they are sarcastic enough about their references that it doesn't get as tiresome, if that qualifies as an effective deterrent. On the maybe side, it feels more like a real-time strategy game than a management game. So maybe if you're looking for something that feels more like Dungeon Keeper, you should opt for War for the Overworld. But there is an argument to be made that if that's not what you're specifically looking for, then Dungeons 3 is the better choice, because it attempts more to be its own thing, and does so fairly well, if it still is quite similar to Dungeon Keeper. On the con side, the gameplay can get repetitive, but in all fairness that may be a problem with all games in the genre, both RTS and management. I recall having a similar problem with 2 Point Hospital, and also the game is not that difficult, and the AI are not dynamic. But maybe Hellish mode is better? Come on, play it, and see a vampire run on a treadmill. Come on, sweat out that blood. Getting in shape requires blood, sweat, and blood.
Choip, choip, choip. Choip, choip, choip.